I put $47,000 into my daughter's wedding fund, and she spent every cent of it on a house, then handed me an envelope that said I wasn't invited to the ceremony. I am 63 years old. I spent 31 years as a high school history teacher in Columbus, Ohio. I know what it looks like when a pattern repeats itself. I've spent my entire career teaching teenagers to recognize the warning signs of a con, the slow build of manipulation, the moment someone decides that another person exists only to be used. I taught it. I graded essays about it. I never once thought I would be the subject of the lesson. My wife passed away from a cardiac event 4 years ago, November, on a Tuesday morning while I was standing in the kitchen making her tea. We had been married for 38 years. After she was gone, the house went quiet in a way I cannot fully describe to someone who has not experienced it. Not just silent. Empty in a way that is weight. I threw myself into the only thing I still knew how to do, which was show up, grade papers, and be useful to the people around me. My daughter was the center of that effort. She was 29 when her mother died. She called me every Sunday. She came home for holidays. I believed, sincerely, that we had found a way to carry the loss together. When she told me she was engaged to a man she had been dating for 14 months, I was happy for her. He was 34, worked in commercial real estate, drove a truck that cost more than my annual pension, and had a way of ending every sentence with a small laugh that made you feel like you had just missed the joke. I did not love him immediately, but she did, and I believed that was enough. My daughter sat across from me at the kitchen table 8 months before the planned wedding date, and told me that what she and her fiancé really needed was help. Not a small amount of help. She told me that between the venue deposit, the catering, the dress, the photographer, the rehearsal dinner, and the honeymoon they were envisioning, the total was going to land somewhere north of $90,000. She showed me a spreadsheet on her laptop. It was color-coded. She had clearly worked on it for a long time. I looked at the numbers and felt the familiar pull of fatherhood, that deep, quiet instinct to solve the problem in front of your child, even when the problem is enormous. I told her I had been saving since her mother died. I told her I had $47,000 set aside in a separate account that I had literally labeled in the bank's online portal, Daughter's Future. I told her I wanted to give her all of it. I told her that her mother would have wanted exactly this, which was the truest thing I said in that entire conversation, and the one she would later use against me most effectively. She cried. She reached across the table and held my hand. She told me I was the best father she had ever known, which sounds like an odd thing to say, but she had always had a tendency toward slightly theatrical gratitude. I gave her the money in 2 wire transfers over the following 10 days, $47,000 total, sent directly to a joint account she shared with her fiancé. She told me the wedding planner required the initial deposit immediately to hold their preferred venue, a restored estate property outside of Pittsburgh she had been dreaming about for years. I did not ask for documentation. I did not ask for a receipt. I trusted her the way you trust a person who has spent 30 years being your child. 6 weeks later, I saw a property listing shared on a neighborhood Facebook group I had joined after my wife passed. One of those local community pages where people post about lost dogs and garage sales. The listing was for a single-family home in a suburb I recognized. A nice area. Tree-lined streets. Good school district. The price was listed at $312,000. The address was familiar to me in a way I could not immediately place. I clicked the photos. The front porch was new. The shutters were freshly painted, but the bones of the house were the same. I had been inside that house exactly once, for a cookout hosted by my daughter's fiancé the previous summer. I had sat on that back deck and eaten a burger and listened to him talk about the real estate market for 40 minutes. My daughter and her fiancé had put a down payment on a house. I sat in my car in the school parking lot for 11 minutes looking at the listing on my phone. I ran the numbers in my head. A down payment on a $300,000 home in that market would run somewhere between 10 and 20%, depending on the loan terms. That was $30,000 to $60,000. My $47,000 fit neatly inside that window. I called her that evening. I kept my voice level. I asked her how the wedding planning was going. She told me everything was coming together beautifully, that the venue was confirmed, that she and her fiancé had just gotten back from a tasting with the caterer. She described the food in detail. She told me the photographer they had booked was exceptional. I listened to all of it, and then I said, as calmly as I was capable of in that moment, that I had seen a property listing online and asked her directly if she and her fiancé had purchased a home recently. There was a pause of exactly the kind that tells you everything. She said yes, they had. She said it came up very suddenly, that the market was moving fast, and that her fiancé had found a deal they could not pass on. She said they had been planning to tell me. She said it in the tone a person uses when they have been rehearsing an explanation they know will not land well. I asked her where the down payment came from. She did not answer that question directly. She said that her fiancé had connections in real estate and had structured the financing creatively. I asked her again, plainly, whether any of the $47,000 I had given her for a wedding had been redirected toward a home purchase. She said I was misunderstanding the situation. She said the finances were complicated, and that her fiancé could explain it better than she could. She said I was being accusatory, which she found hurtful given everything I had done to support them. I ended the call. I went to my home office, the small back bedroom I converted after my wife passed because I needed somewhere to be with the door closed. I sat down at my desk and opened my laptop. I am 63 years old, and I spent 31 years teaching teenagers, and I am not a forensic accountant, but I know how to look at a document and follow what it says. I pulled up the digital confirmation of my first wire transfer. I had sent $24,000 to the joint account on a Thursday in March. I pulled up the second confirmation. $23,000 the following Tuesday. I then logged into a property records database I found through my county's public records portal. Property transactions are public information. The deed transfer for the home in the listing had been recorded 3 weeks after my second wire transfer. The purchase price was confirmed at $314,000. The recorded down payment was $42,000. The remaining $5,000, I would later learn, had gone toward closing costs, moving expenses, and new appliances for the kitchen. They had used $47,000 meant for a wedding to buy themselves a house. There was no restored estate outside of Pittsburgh. There was no venue deposit. There was no color-coded spreadsheet that reflected any real plan. There was just a con, performed at a kitchen table by someone who had held my hand and cried while telling me about her mother. I sat in that back bedroom for a long time. The light outside the window shifted from afternoon to evening to full dark, and I did not turn on the lamp. I thought about my wife, about how she had once told me, early in our marriage, that I had a tendency to see people as better than they were. She said it affectionately. She called it one of my best and worst qualities. I thought about that for a long time in the dark. I did not cry. What I felt instead was a clarity I can only describe as professional. I have spent 31 years in classrooms where I was responsible for knowing exactly what was happening at all times, where the manipulation was, who was running a distraction while someone else cheated, which student's paper had been plagiarized, and from where. That part of my brain, the part that catalogs behavior and traces consequences, went very quiet and very cold and very focused. I was not going to call her back and demand an explanation. I was not going to drive to their new house and pound on the door. I was 63 years old, and I had just been robbed by my own child in the name of a wedding that had never existed. And I was going to handle it with the same methodical patience I applied to everything else that mattered. The first thing I did the following morning was call my bank and request a formal transaction review on both wire transfers. I documented the dates, amounts, and destination account. I saved everything to a folder on my desktop. I printed 3 copies of each confirmation and put them in the manila envelope I kept in the fireproof box under my desk alongside my will, my wife's death certificate, and the deed to my own house. The second thing I did was begin attending Sunday dinners at my daughter's new home as if nothing had changed. This was the part that required the most discipline. My daughter had resumed calling me every Sunday, as if our conversation about the finances had been a small misunderstanding that had naturally resolved itself. She invited me to dinner. Her fiancé grilled. I sat at their kitchen table and ate food and watched them move around their new house with the comfortable ease of people who believe they have gotten away with something. He talked about his work. She talked about the wedding, still described as forthcoming, still described in the same detailed, optimistic language as if the venue and the caterer and the exceptional photographer were all still part of the plan. I listened. I said very little. I watched. What I observed over the Sunday dinners was this. They were not saving for a wedding. They were furnishing a house. New sectional sofa arrived in early May. New dining table in June. A patio set I recognized from a catalog my daughter had left open on the counter. Priced at $4,000. Her fiancé was talking openly about a bathroom renovation he planned to begin in the fall. They were living the life of people who had recently come into a comfortable sum of money and were spending it with the satisfied ease of people who expected more to follow. I also noticed that I was never shown a guest list. I was never consulted on a ceremony date. When I asked, directly and carefully, about the wedding timeline, I was told that they were still figuring out the date, that venues were tricky, that her fiancé's work schedule was complicated in the fall. I started keeping a log. Not dramatic, not obsessive, just a small notebook in my desk drawer where I wrote down dates, statements, and observations the way I used to document classroom incidents when a student was heading toward a serious problem. In late July, I received an envelope in the mail. It had my daughter's handwriting on the outside and a return address I did not recognize at first, a stationery company. I opened it at the kitchen counter. It was a letter, not a card. 2 pages, handwritten, on heavy cream paper. My daughter had always been a better writer than she was a speaker. I will not quote it at length because I have read it enough times that the words have worn grooves in me, but the essential content was this. She and her fiancé had decided that their wedding was going to be a private ceremony, immediate family only, which in practical terms meant his parents and his sister. She wrote that he was not comfortable with large gatherings, that he had always envisioned something intimate, and that she had come to believe that what they both needed was a day that was entirely theirs. She wrote that she hoped I would understand. She wrote that she loved me, and that we would celebrate together afterward. I was not on the guest list. I read the letter twice. I set it on the counter. I went and sat in the living room in the chair my wife had liked best. I looked at the window across from it, at the particular angle of the afternoon light that had been the same angle for 38 years. My daughter had taken $47,000 of my money to buy a house with a man whose family I had met once, and she had decided that I would not be present at her wedding. The money was gone. The seat at the ceremony was gone, and it had been executed so smoothly, so gradually, that I had been sitting at their kitchen table eating grilled chicken and watching them buy patio furniture while it was already decided. I went back to my office. I sat down. I opened my laptop and spent the next 2 hours reading everything I could find about wire transfer fraud and civil recovery of gifted funds under conditions of misrepresentation. I want to be honest, I am a history teacher, not an attorney. But I had been precise in my documentation. I had wire transfer confirmations with dates and amounts. I had the property deed with the recorded date and down payment amount. I had my bank records. I had the original conversation with my daughter where she told me the funds were for a wedding, corroborated by a text message she had sent me the same afternoon that read, and I still have this on my phone. Thank you, Dad. The venue is going to be so beautiful. Mom would have loved it. I called an attorney the next morning. His name is not relevant to this story, but he had been practicing family and civil law in Columbus for 22 years, and he listened to me for 40 minutes without interrupting, which told me something useful about what I was presenting him. He told me that while gift funds are generally considered non-recoverable, the presence of specific documented statements that the funds were designated for a particular purpose, combined with evidence that the funds were immediately redirected to a different purchase without disclosure, created a meaningful basis for a civil fraud claim. He used the words civil fraud and misrepresentation of material fact, and told me to bring him the folder. I brought him the folder the next day. While that process was beginning its slow, formal arc through the system, I turned my attention to what I could do immediately. The gift I had given my daughter was gone, but there were other things I had extended in her direction over the years that were not gone. I had been contributing $300 a month to a savings account I held in both our names, a habit I had started when she was in college that I had simply never stopped. I went to the bank that afternoon and removed her name from the account. I rolled the balance, $11,000, into a certificate of deposit under my name only. I was listed as a beneficiary contact on her car insurance policy from a time years ago when she had been between jobs and I had been helping her with the payments. I was still listed as an emergency contact and secondary account holder. I called the insurance company and removed myself. I had no obligation to be accessible on that policy anymore. I had a storage unit key she had given me years ago when she moved apartments, telling me she needed a temporary place for some furniture. The storage unit was in my name, paid by automatic transfer from my account. I had not thought about it in years. I called the facility and confirmed the unit was still active, still under my account, still being charged to me monthly. The monthly fee was $63, which over the 4 years since she had given me the key added up to a number I found instructive to calculate. I canceled the account and arranged for the facility to send a formal notice that the unit would be cleared and closed in 30 days. Whatever was in there was now her problem to retrieve and her expense to resolve. I drafted a letter to her and her fiancé to my attorney notifying them of the civil claim. I want to be clear about what that felt like, sitting in that office in downtown Columbus watching my attorney's assistant print a document with my daughter's name on it, with her fiancé's name, with the words, misrepresentation of material fact, printed in clear 12-point type. It felt like something was ending that I had not agreed to end. It felt precise and irreversible in the way that only the truth can feel when you finally stop walking around it. My daughter called me the evening the letter was delivered. I know it was delivered because I was tracking it. She did not sound like herself. She sounded the way a person sounds when they have just had something real happen to them that they did not plan for. She asked me if I had sent a lawyer's letter to their house. I told her yes. She asked me why I would do that. I told her, calmly and without raising my voice, that I had done it because she had taken $47,000 I gave her for a wedding and used it to purchase a home without telling me, and then sent me a handwritten letter on heavy cream paper informing me that I would not be attending the ceremony. I told her that the historical record of events, which I had documented quite carefully, supported a civil claim for misrepresentation. She said I was being dramatic. She said her fiancé was furious. She said that taking your own daughter to court was not something a good father did. She said the word father, the way a person says a word they are using as a weapon. I told her that I had spent 31 years watching students use the same tactic, which was to pivot from the substance of the accusation to the character of the person making it, and that it had never once worked in a classroom and it was not going to work now. I told her I was not angry, which was true. I told her I was finished, which was also true. She hung up. Her fiancé called 20 minutes later from his own number. He did not identify himself. He simply began talking in the flat, hard voice of a man who was accustomed to negotiating in bad faith. He told me that I did not understand what I was doing, that filing a civil claim against them would create a legal complication for the mortgage they had taken on the house, and could, in a worst-case interpretation, jeopardize the loan. He told me that I was hurting my own daughter to settle a score. He told me that if I pushed forward, he would make things very difficult for me. And he paused after that in a way that was clearly intended to be menacing. I have been in a classroom with 17-year-olds running that exact move for 3 decades. You let them finish. You let the silence sit. Then you speak from the part of you that does not rattle. I told him that I found it interesting that his first instinct, when faced with a civil claim for misrepresentation, was to describe the legal consequences for the mortgage on the property purchased with the misrepresented funds. I told him that my attorney would find that interesting as well, and that I would pass it along. I told him that the claim was moving forward, and that any further communication should go through my attorney's office. I ended the call. What happened over the following 6 weeks happened slowly, and then all at once, which is, I have always told my students, how most consequential things happen. My attorney filed the formal civil claim. The amount sought was $47,000 plus legal costs and documented consequential damages. Her fiancé, who apparently fancied himself capable of handling legal matters without representation, sent a written response that my attorney described as enthusiastically inadvisable. He had put several things in writing that he should not have put in writing. My attorney was very calm when he told me this. The particular calm of a man who has just been handed more than he asked for. There was a period of 3 weeks where I heard nothing from my daughter. No calls, no texts. I want to describe what that was like, honestly. It was not peaceful. I am 63 years old, and she is the only child I have, and her mother is gone, and I have spent 30 years being the person she called when something went wrong. The absence of contact did not feel like justice. It felt like a different kind of loss sitting on top of the original one. I kept going to work. I kept grading papers. I started clearing out the guest room at my house, which had accumulated years of things that did not have another place to go. I found a box of my daughter's childhood things in the closet, drawings she had made in elementary school, a ribbon from a swim meet, a birthday card she had made for me when she was 7 that said, "Best dad in the universe," because she had not learned to spell universe yet. I sat on the floor of that guest room with that card in my hand for a while. I put the card in the fireproof box with the wire transfer confirmations and the deed record and the attorney correspondence, which felt right in a way I cannot fully explain. In the 4th week, my daughter called, not her fiancé, her. She called at 7 in the evening on a Wednesday, and I answered because I always answer. She sounded exhausted in a way that was different from anger. She asked if we could talk. I told her yes. She said she needed to tell me something and that she wanted to say it without her fiancé present. She told me that the $47,000 had gone to the house. All of it. She told me this plainly, without the scaffolding of the earlier explanations, without the creative financing language. She said her fiancé had pushed hard for the house and had been the one to suggest using the wedding fund because the timing of the market made it, in his assessment, a once-in-a-generation opportunity. She said she had told herself they would repay it before I noticed. She said she knew while she was sitting at my kitchen table holding my hand that she was not being honest with me about where the money was going. Then she said something I have thought about many times since. She said that after her mother died, she had watched me do everything for everyone and never ask for anything, and that she had started thinking of my generosity as something structural, like a load-bearing wall, something you could count on being there without having to think about it, and that she had stopped thinking about whether it was costing me anything. I sat with that for a long moment. I recognized something in the language because I had used almost the same words once, in a different context, in a lesson about institutional power, and how people who benefit from a system rarely examine how the system operates. She had learned it somewhere. I suppose she had learned it from me. I told her that I heard what she was saying. I told her it did not change what had happened. I told her the claim was not going away, not because I wanted to punish her, but because $47,000 is not an amount of money I can absorb and simply release. I told her that if she wanted a path toward restitution and toward something that might eventually resemble a relationship, it was going to have to run through an honest accounting of what had been taken and a real plan to address it. She was quiet for a long time. Then she said she would talk to a lawyer of her own. The civil proceeding resulted in a mediated settlement 4 months later. The terms are not fully public record, and I will not detail them entirely here, but the outcome included a structured repayment agreement, a legally recorded financial acknowledgement of the misrepresentation, and the permanent removal of any expectation that I would contribute further to any joint financial matter involving her fiancé. My attorney described the settlement as unusually favorable for a claim of this type. He said the written responses her fiancé had filed early in the process had done significant damage to their negotiating position. I was not at the wedding. It happened in October, a small ceremony as she had described, and I learned about it afterward through a photograph she sent me by text with no caption. Just the image. She was wearing a dress I had not seen before, and she looked, honestly, beautiful and a little sad. I looked at that photograph for a long time. I did not send the gift. What I did instead, and the week after the photograph arrived, was take the money I had removed from the joint savings account and the first installment of the settlement repayment and book myself something I had not allowed myself in 4 years of widowhood and 3 decades of teaching. I booked a 10-day trip to the coast of Portugal, specifically to a small city I had taught about in a European history unit for 15 years without ever seeing in person. I booked a room in a small hotel a block from the water. I arranged for a local guide service for 2 of the days and left the rest unscheduled. I went alone. I want to tell you what it felt like to sit on a stone wall above the Atlantic Ocean in Lisbon on a Tuesday afternoon in November, watching the light fall across the water the way it does in those latitudes, with no papers to grade and no one to call and no claim on my attention from anyone. I want to tell you that it felt like grief and freedom at the same time, which I have since come to think is exactly what it is supposed to feel like when you stop subsidizing your own diminishment. My daughter and I have spoken 4 times since the settlement. The conversations are careful in the way that conversations are careful when there has been a real rupture, and neither party is entirely sure what is left on the other side. She does not mention her husband often. I do not ask about the house. We are, I think, in the early days of something that might become something else in time, or might not. I am a history teacher. I know that outcomes this close to the event are very difficult to assess. You need distance. You need time to see what the shape of a thing actually is. What I know right now is this. I spent 31 years teaching young people to recognize manipulation, to follow the primary source, to ask who benefits and what was actually said versus what was implied. I was remarkably slow to apply any of those skills to my own life. That is a fact I carry with some humility. I also know that the $47,000, or most of it, is coming back to me on a schedule my attorney considers enforceable. I know that my house is my own. I know that my fireproof box has more documents in it than it did 2 years ago, and that each of those documents is a record of something that was tested and survived the test. I know that I have been to Lisbon and stood above the water and understood, in a way that is very hard to teach, that the life you are protecting has to be your own life first, or there is nothing left to give anyone. My name is Leonard Marsh, and I am 63 years old, and I am a retired history teacher, and I spent $47,000 on a wedding that was never going to happen. What happened after that is the part I would not change.